I really need to get back into my Dungeon and Discord review. What's this? The Enchanted Library. Well, it is the month of Macabry, and I heard this is sort of a romantic ghost story. I also don't see my Cleve reading getting done anytime soon without a Lyra or Bonbon VA. I'm sure one chapter or two can't hurt to get into the Halloween spirit. Must keep reading, must keep reading, must keep reading. Who needs to edit? I must read more! Was that something? It's got a lot of likes, but I wonder. Nothing on YouTube. Good enough for me. Might as well take the time away from my reviews of other stuff to look at this one. Hello everyone, AP here, bringing you today the Enchanted Library for Underappreciation. In an alternate timeline from the one we know in the show, where Twilight was born and ascended many centuries earlier, after trying and supposedly failing to defeat Discord, Twilight and the other four princesses were cursed for all time for defying the Lord of Chaos, with Twilight's fate being locked in her tree library for all time as a ghost-like being, which is questioned a lot in various comedic moments throughout the story. That is, until about 1,000 years later, when Rarity stumbles into the library. Of course, at this point, Twilight and the other four princesses are nothing but a legend, with only Cadence's greatest granddaughter, Princess Diane, ruling Equestria. After getting over the shock that her favorite bedtime story princess is real, Rarity volunteers to help try to free Twilight from her library, all with the constant fear of the Lord of Chaos on her tail. The first thing I want to note is how well the AU tag for this story is used. Rather than just being a different timeline, I found some of my, if not necessarily favorite, but still enjoyable parts, were when we get some idea of how this Equestria differs from the one in the show. Most of which has to do with Celestia and Luna not being a part of it, whether it's Nightmare Night being replaced by Seeker's Night since Nightmare Moon never happened, to what different locations called the princesses since their names were forgotten, to little tidbits like where Twilight is the only one in the whole story who swears to Celestia. If you're going to make an AU story, then I say the best you can do is to make sure you get the little details right. And for the most part this story seems to do so, but that's just the small stuff. What else is really good about this one? Well, obviously the relationship between Twilight and Rarity. What? I ship AJ with Rara, so her other ships are open market for me. Sparity is never gonna happen, get over it! Joking aside, fun fact, prior to this story, the last large fic I tried to read was green. Why is this important? Bear with me here if you're a fan of green, but it's because the Enchanted Library felt more like what I wanted green to have been. At least in terms of a love story. Maybe it was just because the Enchanted Library had the advantage of being an adventure story, where green is more of slice of life, but I felt like there was much more of a conflict with Rarity and Twilight trying to get together in this story than with Fluttershy and Rarity in green. The progression of these two also develops at a much more enjoyable pace, where with green, just as Rarity and Fluttershy were about to get together, I couldn't help but say to myself, just get together already, since it had reached a point in the story where we, the audience, knew at said point they both liked each other, and all they had to do was say it and they could be a couple. A golden rule when writing a getting together story. What creates tension in a good such story is when it's clear that one lead likes the other, but it's not for certain if said love interest feels the same way. Sure, you can make it seem like partner 2 could be interested, but it's also important to not make it where it's clear there would be no stakes of rejection until the time comes, or else the story just drags on. Green had a bit of this problem, but the Enchanted Library never did, at least for me. Again, it could be with an unfair advantage of them being unable to get together until Twilight is free, but I also felt when the time came for Rarity to admit her feelings to Twilight, it felt perfect, and even if you could think Twilight liked her, it wasn't as obvious as with Fluttershy and Green, where I was thinking at their moment, if they didn't kiss, the story would just drag on. However, to me personally, it was also because it avoids many of the annoying tropes a bad getting together romance story has, which Green did as well, but unlike where, for lack of a better way to describe it, Green was a bit too mushy. And if you like it, that's fine, but me personally, I often find the best romance stories are the ones that don't try to be too cheesy or feely, at least in the beginning, and it's more like it's trying to tell a story that happens to be around a romance rather than the other way around. Then as it grows on you, it starts to focus on the romance. But because of this, you feel Rarity and Twilight all throughout, as they learn about one another and the feels for them when they're apart for even a short time. And when they're apart for a long time, oh boy, let me tell you. Now, I don't want to give too much away to explain, since this kind of ties in with a spoiler about Princess Diane's and Discord's involvement with the story's present, but there is a point in the story where Rarity is unable to return to the library, which, thankfully, I got to that part in the early afternoon of that day, because I had myself unable to sleep until I saw Rarity and Twilight get back together. I was that invested with them. Just the pain of the possibility that Rarity would never see Twilight again drove both her and even myself into a mental break. Think Rarity in Fame and Misfortune, only with a goal she knows how to achieve, but can't get to. It's somehow a perfect mix of rather tragic and entertaining, in an over-the-top way only someone like Rarity can pull off. But it also shows just how much both Twilight has come to mean to her, as, at one point herself quoting, "If the library was Twilight's physical prison, it had become her mental one." You see herself go into some pretty deep denial. She almost gets herself killed numerous times trying to get back to the library, and even has nightmares where her daughter is the one to free Twilight and fall in love with her. To the climax of her breakdown, which I will not spoil here, but again, it's both entertaining and satisfying in all the right ways. What also kept me engaged was how at times it kept me guessing as to where it was going to go. Even if there was a part of me knowing how it was eventually going to end, there were parts where I wasn't sure how or even if it was going to get there. One of my favorite examples of this was with Princess Diane. Again, don't want to get into too much spoiler detail here, but the story did make me doubt if she even cared about finding the other princesses, or even if she was in league with Discord. You're not sure what's truth and what isn't, and it manages to pay off in a surprising way I'm sure a lot of people won't see coming. But unlike most twists nowadays, you can look back and see how everything about Diane's made sense. It's a good way of keeping tension without being too obvious with what was or wasn't going to happen. I could probably go on about all the side characters I liked, interesting locations, the story with Pinkie Pie and Princess Luna, but just quick, was there anything I didn't like? Well, there was a point where Rarity went on a date with a guard when trying to tell Diane about Twilight that I rolled my eyes about. It didn't last long and actually tied in later, but it did worry me at first. But no, the only bad thing I could legit say is how it made me relook at some of my other works. Let me explain. See, what makes this so engaging is how, a lot of times, a lot of cruel and unfair things happen to Rarity throughout her journey to free Twilight. But by that I mean, it's a perfect showcase of how to create both believable tension and realistic conflict. In fiction, you do have to try and make it as hard as you can to keep your main character from reaching their goal, even when it seems harsh. And that's what makes the payoff with the ending more worth it. And I've seen many stories, even some of my own, that just can't bring themselves to take such risks and put their characters in such stressful and painful situations, even if it is what the story demands. But this story does, and it's one I'd recommend checking out if you're just getting into or still learning about writing. And like myself, know how you want your story to begin and end, but aren't sure how to connect the two in the middle efficiently with good conflict. There were very few times I found myself bored with this story. At worst, there were just a part that wrapped up a side plot enough for me to go to bed that night. Everywhere else, I would advise you to make sure you have a lot of free time before reading. Take advantage whenever one story arc line ends to get some sleep, and only start very early in the day. Cause trust me, this is one ride that will have you hooked from beginning to end. But what do you think? If you read the Enchanted Library, I'd love to hear about your experience below. Was I a bit too unfair with green? And will me and the boys ever finish our HeroScape adventure? Let me know, and I hope this video is worth your time, and happy Halloween!